Hey everyone. A lot of people ask me, what is the difference between what you put in a log frame, what you put in a work breakdown, and what ends up on your Gantt chart as part of your implementation plan, how those things look different and how they're the same. I like to use the example of building a house. And so when I want to build a house, maybe I need a loan from the bank, I'm going to put a proposal to the bank that is going to show that the money that I asked for in my loan is adequate to the cost of building a house, and that they will see a return on their investment in that I'll have a completed house, which they will then own with that loan, usually in a mortgage. So in my proposal, often when you ask for a major loan like that, they're going to want a list of activities and phases. What they don't really want is a logical framework. The logical framework is more justifying the outcomes. So that is what you would take to convince your family that building a house is better than renting or buying a pre-existing house and maybe doing some refurbishing. It's more about looking for that change and convincing of that change. So the log frame will list the activities, but to justify the greater outcome. If we do this and this and this, we will overcome a problem. Maybe that problem is that over the long run, rents are significantly higher. So it is financially a good idea to take a loan, build a house, and have that equity. That's what you would have kind of in the log frame. It's the logical framework of showing how that works. Once that's already happened and you've got the activities that you're planning to do, that's where the work breakdown structure comes into place. It is much more detailed because the overarching activities, these kind of ideas, for example, in your log frame, you might have had the activities would be to do research about where to buy land, to have architects do the drawings, to look at various materials, etc. Then you'll have build house, complete house. In your work breakdown, obviously you cannot go to a contractor and say, here's my plan, buy property, buy materials, build house, happy family. You need much more detail. So in your work breakdown, you would break that down, and typically in construction or in other projects, we'll have phases. In house construction, it's pretty straightforward. It's usually from the bottom up, so you'll start with digging the hole for the foundation. And the key in the work breakdown structure is to identify all of the moving parts within the project. Not only the major activity groups, but what are the sub-activities? What is each person doing on the job? And this is about allocating resources. So we often do this mentally in our head when we think about something that needs to be done and how much time, money, or people we would put into doing that. If I'm talking about baking cookies, if I want to bake 3 dozen cookies, I have in my head how much the idea of how many ingredients that's going to be, how much that's going to cost me, how much time it takes to get 3 dozen cookies through my oven. And I also have an idea in my head of whether having a second person will actually make it go faster. Usually the answer is no for something like that, simply because there's only one oven, and mixing the dough doesn't really go a whole lot faster. Or maybe I only need that person while I'm scooping dough onto a cookie sheet. That's the one stage where a second person would really help. Other than that, they're going to be standing around a lot. So it wouldn't be a good investment in that second person from a financial standpoint. So it's about breaking that down. So a work breakdown structure will actually say, this is the activity. These are all the little sub-activities that need to be assigned to someone to do or some cost, and then identifying how much cost will be allocated to that activity. When I go back to the loan with the bank, this is not quite the full detail that they want. They will want the list of activities and how much it's going to cost. So we're going to put in a new bathroom, the materials purchase materials for the bathroom. Here's a list of them. This is about what they'll cost. There will be labor. Total package is this much. And that's what we would get from a contractor's estimate. The contractor would give that to me, breakdown. Here's your bathroom cost, your kitchen cost, your flooring cost, your roofing cost, etc. But then when they go to implement the project, they will be saying, all right, we said that we could do the bathroom for $10,000. This is how much we're going to spend on tile. This is how much we're going to spend on a bathtub. And the install of the bathtub, I budgeted based on that only taking 2 days. So it better take us only 2 days. If it doesn't take us 2 days, then we're going to be over budget on that. We got to work that out somewhere else. The work breakdown lists all of these things. And the other thing about the work breakdown is that it starts to include things that we don't always have in the logical framework, such as the monitoring processes and the activities involved there. We've talked a bit in the past about monitoring and evaluation, but monitoring has to be ongoing during your project. And obviously someone has to do that. So there is a cost associated with that, and there is a timeline associated with that. When I was working on my house, for example, I had to give a report to the bank every certain period of the progress. So I knew that in order to be able to give that report, the day before I had to visit the site, collect information on what had been done, and compare that with what was supposed to have been done, be able to explain what was different, what we call the variance, and submit that to the bank to get my funding continually approved for the next amount of funding for the construction. So in the same way with many of our development projects, we do ongoing monitoring, we do ongoing reporting, and these activities require time, and they are often attached to firm deadlines. That transitions us to a Gantt chart. Now, a Gantt chart is a specific way of tracking progress over time. The most important part of the Gantt chart, and the part that we often leave out, is actually the critical path. The purpose of that Gantt chart, as it was originally designed, was to say what are the things that we can, where we have a margin of error in terms of time or cost, and what are the things where we don't. Specifically focusing on time, and recognizing that activity C cannot be done before activity B is completed. What is the consequence of an adjusted time or cost delays on activity B? And how can we adjust for that when we get into C? So going back to my housing analogy, I know that electrical cannot work on the house until the framing is done. You need a foundation to be put in. You need the walls to go up because electrical runs through the walls. On the other hand, it's also much more complicated to have your electrical done after the wall siding or the drywall or anything like that is installed, because the wiring is supposed to be inside the walls. So you really want the electrical to come during that time. If electrical doesn't show up, you've now delayed your drywall contractor. Depending on how you've arranged it, you might be putting a delay on your plumber. If you delay your drywaller, now you're delaying the ability to put paint on, because the drywall process has to be done, completed, and dried before you can obviously paint the walls. This also will affect your flooring. So we see all of these ripple and knock-on effects, and a Gantt chart allows a project manager during the process of implementation to be able to look at any point, say, where should we be? Which activities should be ongoing right now? Quickly check the status of the person responsible for those activities and adjust accordingly. We're supposed to be at 80%. We're only at 60%. How do we get back to 80% to get back on track? Do we give more resources, whether that's more budget, more personnel? Do we take another timing and make it shorter? If my electrical is delayed, can I call the drywallers and say, I'm willing to pay more. Can you get it done in 2 days instead of 3 to get us back on track? Maybe that's a possibility. So we constantly are negotiating these pieces. And remember, this is going back to our triple constraints of time, budget, and scope. That is how we continue to manage the project. So as you're putting together these pieces, often you find that your log frame may have forgotten a whole element. Your log frame should be directly tied to the part of your problem you're solving. It should have a problem, the results of a solution, and the activities which will address the problem to create those results or the solution. But as you start to do a work breakdown structure, you might realize I completely did not identify the procurement process in order to achieve this activity. Even if it's something as simple as a fundraising event. If you plan to have a fundraising event in a certain amount of time, have you budgeted enough time to print and distribute the invitations in time to get the RSVPs that people will be able to attend your fundraising event? If you're delayed, does that mean that less people will come because the fundraising or the time for them to make the decision, the time for RSVP is too short, they've already made other plans, those kinds of things. So as you're doing the work breakdown, you're starting to really get into the real nitty-gritty. It goes as nitty-gritty as possible to identify all of the little elements that need addressing. And often I see as people work on their work breakdown, it's too simple. The log frame might be too complicated, but the work breakdown structure is too simple. So make sure that it is way more detailed. And then as you do your work breakdown and you realize that, maybe it means going back to adjust the log frame, changing it a little bit to be more correct, more in line with the actual project delivery. Then as you do the Gantt chart and you start looking at the dependencies and the critical path, maybe you miscalculated on the work breakdown. Perhaps as you realize, oh, with these linking elements, I will not be able to complete the project in time as what I planned. Therefore, I need to change one of those elements. Maybe I go back to my work breakdown structure and budget increased staffing for a specific activity in order to get it done a little bit faster. If you remember from the PMD Pro guide, the D Pro guide, the example of the Delta River, and there were certain elements within the project which could not be sped up. That meant that other elements had to be adjusted because of the fixed time for those specific activities. Well, some of them are dependent on others, some others are not. For example, my monitoring is very rarely dependent on any of the implementation activities. I can monitor at just about any time. It's maybe more dependent on what other tasks I'm doing, how many other projects I have, or dependent on the reporting period for which I'm monitoring. I have to monitor before I submit a report or give an update. That's where the dependencies on monitoring lie. It doesn't matter if they've completed an action or not, because I'm going to see whether they have, and then to adjust accordingly. So that kind of gives a little bit of some of the challenges that people have presented that I've seen that need to be addressed between these. And I think the important thing to remember is a Gantt chart is only as useful as it is active, meaning it can be created at the beginning, static, but it has to remain dynamic. It has to be looked at over and over again, because unless you start adjusting and moving the activities to their current timeline, you are not seeing the impact on other activities along the timeline, which makes the Gantt chart useless or for its intended purposes. So as you design a Gantt chart, make sure that you track critical path by linking dependencies. You can do that either just by drawing them in, sometimes with an arrow or bright red. But more and more people are using project management software. A lot of very powerful tools are free online now. Team Gantt is one. Project Manager is another that very easily give you the ability to load your work breakdown list of activities into the Gantt chart, add timing, and it'll update in real time for you. You can share it with teammates. They can actually do their own updates for you so that you have ongoing monitoring where they do progress reports at maybe every day at the end of the day or at the end of the week showing where they are on these activities. And also this is where a lot of the rise of Agile and other newer forms of project management have come from, not in terms of the earlier tools, but in terms of the implementation tracking tools. So the use of Asana and other software which are out there to use more of a board or a Kaizen approach, which we don't really discuss here, but these approaches are ways of actually allocating resources, tracking where those resources are being utilized to make sure the tasks are being completed. So just to recap, your log frame is specifically linking the tree, the problem tree, solutions tree, so that you can show activities which will be done, in resources inputted, activities completed to achieve outputs, and then outcomes. Remember, outputs are typically very quantifiable, and in terms of the fact that they are normally the direct completion of the activities. Outcomes normally rely on changes in behavior or attitudes, and they depend on outside influence. Outputs you can complete just by spending money and time. Outcomes normally need to have a shift that's triggered by your outputs. So Logframe is activities, outputs, outcomes towards the goal. The work breakdown takes those activities and lists all of them, including supporting ones like monitoring, maybe some marketing, any other outside elements. They identify the accounting processes, the logistics and procurement processes, and identify all of their activities and sub-activities in a numbered list. Even if you do a mind map or a bubble tree diagram for your work breakdown to make sure that you have got the hierarchies, you then need to put the numbers in, identify them. And for my assignments, you need to put a price on those as well. And then moving from that work breakdown, a Gantt chart is one way, not the only way, but the one that we use here, the one way of tracking your progress of your work breakdown over time. Each of those steps as you go, look backwards, identify if you need to change the steps before to make sure that they are all in line, because at the end of the day, while you're implementing your project, your Gantt chart should directly speak to your work breakdown and have everything that's in the work breakdown should be in your tracking through your Gantt chart or other tracking tool. And the work breakdown should cover all of the activities, inputs required to achieve the measurables in the log frame. That's it for now. I hope this has been a little bit more clarifying, and have a wonderful day.